Absolutely not. Get your glowing, tentacle thing away from my mouth. Kale jerked his head back, nearly cracking it against the grimy bulkhead of the derelict freighter's galley. He'd found her huddled in the dark, shivering despite the recycled air's cloying warmth. She looked like something dredged from a bioluminescent tide pool, all sleek, dark scales that shifted with iridescent blues and greens, limbs too long and thin, wide obsidian eyes and delicate, faintly glowing tendrils framing a face that was unsettlingly humanoid yet distinctly other. He'd done the decent thing, the stupid thing, cracked open a nutrient bar, synthetic protein, vaguely berry-flavored, and offered it. She'd taken it with unnerving speed, sniffed it like it might explode, then mirrored his gesture. Except her version involved breaking off a crumb and extending a digit tipped with a soft, pulsating cyan light, aiming directly for his lips. Her expression was unreadable, intense curiosity mixed with something else, proprietary. He had no idea. Universal Standard clearly wasn't her first language if she had one at all. She tilted her head, the tendrils near her jaw quivering, emitting a faint chime-like sound. The glowing fingertip didn't waver. "Eat," she chirped, the word heavily accented, sounding like rocks tumbling underwater. It was one of maybe 5 words he'd heard her try. Kale held up his hands placatingly. "Look up, friend, pal, shiny space squid lady, we don't do that. Humans, we feed ourselves, see." He ostentatiously took a bite of his own bar, chewed, swallowed. "My mouth, my food." "Your mouth, your food." He pointed at her, then at the piece she held, then back at her mouth. She watched his demonstration, her large eyes tracking every movement. Then slowly, deliberately, she brought the crumb she held to her own lips, mimicking his exaggerated chew. A soft, satisfied hum vibrated in the air, and the glow on her fingertip faded slightly. Progress. Maybe. She swallowed, then immediately broke off another piece of the bar and offered it to him again, same glowing fingertip, same determined stare. "Eat." Okay, not progress. Stubborn alien logic loop, or maybe something else. The way she looked at him wasn't hostile, it was focused. Possessive almost. Like he was a strange, fascinating puzzle she was determined to solve, starting with his digestive tract. "Right, okay, new plan." Kale pushed himself carefully away from the bulkhead. "You stay here, don't touch anything, especially anything explosive. I'm going to check things." He needed space. Needed to process finding a shipwrecked, glowing alien woman apparently obsessed with hand-feeding him processed rations. He backed towards the galley door, keeping her in his sight. She didn't follow, just watched him, nibbling thoughtfully on the nutrient bar. The iridescent patterns on her scales seemed to swirl, deepening in color. Was that contentment? Annoyance? He couldn't tell. Her tendrils swayed gently, emitting that soft, almost musical resonance again. It vibrated faintly in his teeth. He slipped through the doorway, the pneumatic door hissing shut behind him, cutting off the chime. He leaned against the corridor wall, breathing heavily. He was a scavenger, used to navigating wreckage, dealing with automated defenses, maybe the occasional desperate squatter. Not this. Not iridescent space sirens with boundary issues and weird feeding protocols. He scrubbed a hand over his face. He just wanted to strip this old freighter for parts, make a quick credit, maybe buy himself a week without worrying about fuel or docking fees. Instead, he'd found her. And now, apparently, he was responsible for her. Or maybe she was responsible for him. That fingertip, inches from his mouth, there, been a weird static charge in the air, a tingling sensation that had nothing to do with fear. Mostly. He ran a diagnostic on his risk comp. Ship's manifest listed this sector as recently quarantined due to unspecified stellar phenomena. Vague, dangerous. Usually meant pirates, plagues, or territorial disputes nobody wanted to officially acknowledge. Her ship must have run afoul of whatever it was. Was she the only survivor? She didn't look injured, just lost, and intensely focused on him. He peeked back through the grimy window in the galley door. She was still there, methodically finishing the nutrient bar, her gaze fixed on the door as if she knew he was watching. The glow from her tendrils pulsed softly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat, or a warning, or an invitation. Gods, he needed a drink, or maybe just to get back to his ship, the rust bucket, and pretend none of these ever happened. Except leaving her here felt wrong. She wouldn't survive long alone on this hulk, especially if whatever brought down her ship was still lurking nearby. And there was that look in her eyes, that intense, unwavering focus. It wasn't just curiosity. It felt intentional, like she'd been waiting for him, which was insane. He sighed, pushing off the wall. Fine. Rule 1 of scavenging, never get attached to the salvage. Rule 2, definitely don't get attached to sentient, glowing salvage that tries to feed you like a baby bird. He was already breaking Rule 2, might as well lean into it. He opened the door again. She looked up, the last crumb disappearing between her lips. A faint cyan glow lingered there for a second. He cleared his throat. All right, Shiny, let's figure out what we do now. She tilted her head, the chiming sound returning, louder this time. She pushed herself gracefully to her feet, her movements fluid and strangely silent despite the metal deck. She was taller than he'd initially thought, easily meeting his eye level, and she was holding another piece of the nutrient bar, pointedly, towards him. He groaned. This was going to be a long day. She moved closer, closing the distance he tried to create. The chiming intensified, settling into a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the deck plates and up Kale's boots. He could feel it in his chest, a strange sympathy buzz against his ribs. Her scales shifted color again, swirling patterns of deep violet and electric blue chasing across her skin. Was that her version of blushing? Or maybe aggression? With her, the signals were all scrambled static. He stood his ground this time, trying not to flinch as she stopped barely a foot away. The offered nutrient bar crumb was still there, held delicately between two fingers tipped with that soft cyan light. No, Kale said, aiming for firm but ending up somewhere near strained politeness. I eat myself. You eat yourself. He tapped his chest, then hers. She blinked slowly, her large, dark eyes reflecting the dim emergency lights. The tendrils near her jaw brushed against his cheek as she tilted her head again, a feather-light contact that sent an unexpected jolt down his spine. It wasn't unpleasant, just startlingly intimate. He jerked back instinctively. Hey, personal space. Her expression flickered. Was that confusion, amusement? The resonance humming from her deepened, taking on a lower, almost questioning tone. She retracted the hand with the food, but then before he could relax, her other hand darted out, quick as a striking serpent. Her fingers, cool and smooth despite their faint luminescence, closed gently around his wrist. Kale froze. Her grip wasn't tight, not threatening, but it was definite, proprietary. He could feel the faint thrum of her energy, the same resonance he felt through the deck, now conducted directly into his bloodstream. It made his teeth ache and his skin prickle. Let go, he said, his voice tight. She didn't. Instead, she tugged lightly, insistently, pulling his hand towards her. Her thumb brushed over his pulse point and the swirling colors on her arm brightened, flaring momentarily like a struck match. He felt a dizzying wave of something. Not emotion, exactly. More like raw sensory data, curiosity, warmth, a weird spike of possessiveness that felt like it originated from her. Was she broadcasting, communicating through touch? What are you? He breathed, momentarily forgetting to pull away. Her lips curved in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that were pearlescent, slightly pointed. Lyra, she whispered, the sound like water flowing over smooth stones. She tapped her own chest lightly. Lyra. Then she tapped his chest, her glowing fingertip lingering just over his heart. Her gaze was intense, searching. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. The air crackled with that weird energy again. Kale, he managed, his voice rough. My name is Kale. Her smile widened fractionally. Kale, she repeated, the sound alien and yet strangely perfect. She leaned in closer, her strange, pleasant scent like ozone and night-blooming flowers filling his senses. Her thumb was still stroking his pulse, and the rhythmic hum emanating from her seemed to synchronize with his own heartbeat. This was bad. This was deeply, profoundly weird and potentially dangerous. He should pull away, assert dominance, establish boundaries. But his feet felt bolted to the floor, and the warmth spreading from her touch was compelling. A sudden clang echoed from deeper within the freighter, followed by the scrape of heavy metal. Both their heads snapped towards the sound. Lyra's posture changed instantly. The playful curiosity vanished, replaced by a predatory stillness. The glow from her tendrils sharpened, turning a brighter, more piercing cyan. The colors on her scales stopped swirling, hardening into jagged patterns of black and electric blue. Her grip on his wrist tightened, not painfully but with undeniable strength. Trouble. Cale muttered, instinctively reaching for the battered pulse pistol holstered at his hip. Lyra let out a low hiss, a sound that vibrated with warning. She tugged his wrist again, pulling him towards the shadowed recesses of the galley pantry. "Hide," she whispered, the single word sharp and urgent. She didn't wait for his agreement, practically shoving him behind a stack of overturned storage crates before melting into the shadows beside him, her iridescent skin suddenly dimming, blending almost perfectly with the grime and darkness. The only sign of her presence was the faint, sharp scent of ozone and the residual warmth where her hand had gripped his wrist. And the feeling, deep in his gut, that whatever was clanging around out there, it was probably looking for her. And now, by association, him too. Fantastic, just utterly fantastic. The cramped space behind the crates smelled of stale coolant and desperation. Cale crouched low, pulse pistol held ready, every nerve ending buzzing. Beside him, Lyra was unnervingly still, a darker shadow within the shadows. The faint, rhythmic glow he'd come to associate with her was completely extinguished. Even her scent seemed muted, tucked away. Only the slight pressure of her shoulder against his betrayed her presence. The clanging grew louder, closer. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor outside the galley. Not human footsteps. Too heavy, too rhythmic, definitely mechanical or maybe augmented. Scavengers, pirates, or something specifically hunting her. Lyra shifted slightly, a subtle adjustment of weight. He felt rather than saw her head turn towards the galley entrance. A low growl, almost too quiet to hear, vibrated through her body and into his where they touched. It wasn't a sound of fear. It was pure, primal warning. Cale risked a glance around the edge of the crate. Two figures filled the galley doorway, bulky silhouettes against the corridor lights. They wore heavy environmental hazard suits, helmets obscuring their faces, but the sigil on their shoulder plates was unmistakable: Xenohunter Guild. Slavers, basically, specializing in rare or exotic non-human species. His stomach plummeted. These guys weren't just opportunistic pirates. They were professionals, well-armed and ruthless. And they were clearly looking for Lyra. One of them raised a scanner, sweeping the galley. The beam passed over their hiding spot. Cale held his breath, praying the overturned crates and general debris would be enough clutter to fool it. Beside him, Lyra pressed tighter against his side. He could feel the tension humming off her, a coiled spring ready to snap. "Signal's weak, but she's here," one of the hunters grunted, his voice filtered through the suit's comms. "Containment field ready." "Ready," the other replied, raising a bulky rifle-like device. "Standard protocol. Sedate, tag, transport. Try not to damage the luminescence. Command wants this one pristine." Pristine, like she was a piece of cargo. Bile rose in Cale's throat. He wasn't a hero, just a guy trying to scrape by. But listening to them talk about her like that, it ignited something cold and hard in his chest. He tightened his grip on his pistol. He was outmatched, outgunned, hiding in a pantry with an alien he barely knew, but the thought of letting them take her, no. Absolutely not. Lyra nudged his arm gently with her head. He looked at her. In the dimness, her eyes seemed enormous, luminous pools of black. She tilted her head towards a narrow maintenance hatch low on the wall behind them, almost completely hidden by shadows and grime. "Escape route, smart girl." She gave another almost imperceptible nod, then shifted away from him, melting deeper into the shadows near the hatch. He understood. She'd create a diversion, he'd get the hatch open. Risky. Probably stupid. But better than waiting to be found. He took a deep breath, holstered his pistol, kneaded both hands for the hatch, and focused on the corroded locking mechanism. It looked manual, thank the stars. He braced himself. The hunters were starting to move deeper into the galley, their heavy boots crunching on debris. "Check the storage areas," the first one ordered. Time was up. Cale looked back towards where Lyra had been. The shadow detached itself from the wall. For a split second, a blinding flash of emerald and gold light erupted near the galley entrance, accompanied by a high-pitched screech that made Cale's fillings vibrate. Both hunters yelled, momentarily stunned. "Now, Cale!" Lyra's voice hissed from near the hatch, urgent and low. He scrambled towards it, fumbling with the rusted latch. It resisted, fused by time and neglect. He swore under his breath, putting his shoulder into it. Behind him, he heard the crackle of energy weapons firing, followed by a crash and Lyra's enraged, non-human snarl. The hatch groaned, then popped open with a shriek of tortured metal, revealing a dark, narrow crawlspace. "Go!" Lyra yelled again, closer now. He risked a glance back. She was a whirlwind of shifting color and shadow, dodging energy bolts, impossibly fast, impossibly agile. One hunter was down, suit sparking. The other was advancing, containment field rifle raised. Lyra darted towards the pantry, towards him. "Kale!" He didn't hesitate. He scrambled into the crawlspace, the darkness swallowing him whole. He heard Lyra slide in behind him just as an energy blast impacted the crate he'd been hiding behind, sending splinters showering into the crawlspace. "Seal it!" she gasped, her voice strained. He reached back, fumbling for the hatch handle in the pitch black. His fingers brushed against something cool and smooth, her arm. He found the handle, slammed the heavy metal door shut, and threw the internal locking bolts. Heavy thuds impacted the other side of the hatch, followed by muffled cursing. They were trapped in the dark, breathing heavily, the adrenaline singing in Kale's veins. He could feel Lyra pressed against his back, her body radiating heat and that strange, thrumming energy. Her breathing was ragged. "You okay?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. A soft chime answered him, weaker than before, but there. Then her hand found his in the darkness, fingers lacing through his. Her touch was cool, calming, yet electric. The resonance flowed between them again, a silent exchange of fear, relief, and something else, a spark of connection forged in shared danger. She squeezed his hand gently. "Okay," she murmured, her voice regaining some strength. "We okay." Okay was relative. They were stuck in a maintenance duct on a derelict freighter, hunted by slavers. But she was right. For now, pressed together in the dark, hand in hand, they were okay, and that felt like a victory. The crawlspace was tight, barely wide enough for Kale to shimmy forward on his elbows and knees. Dust rained down from the low ceiling, coating his face and making him cough. Behind him, Lyra moved with a disturbing fluidity, silent except for the occasional soft scrape of her scales against the metal. He could feel her presence like a low-level hum against his back, punctuated by the occasional accidental brush of her knee or hand. Each touch sent a distracting jolt through his system. They needed to move, find another way out, preferably one that led back towards his ship. The rust bucket wasn't much, but it had shields, weapons, and FTL capability. Their only chance was to get off this freighter before those xenohunters regrouped or called for backup. "Any idea where this leads?" Kale whispered back into the darkness. Lyra's response was a series of soft clicks and chimes, accompanied by a gentle pressure on his ankle. He frowned. "Right, forgot. Not exactly fluent." Another soft chime, this one sounding suspiciously like amusement. Then her voice, low and close to his ear, "Forward, away, safe." Grunted acknowledgement. Forward it was. The silence stretched, broken only by their movements and the distant groans of the dying freighter. He found his mind wandering back to the galley, to her flash of light, her speed, the primal snarl. She wasn't just some lost exotic. She was dangerous, capable, and she'd risked herself to give him time to open the hatch. Why? Self-preservation. Maybe. Or maybe that possessive focus he'd sensed earlier went deeper than just wanting to feed him nutrient paste. The thought was both unnerving and flattering. He mentally kicked himself. Focus, Kale. Survival first, deciphering alien motives later. After what felt like an eternity of scraping through the dark, the duct began to slope downwards. Kale caught a whiff of something different in the air, dampness, decay, a hint of organic matter. "Smell that?" he asked. A soft hum answered him, affirmative. The duct ended abruptly, opening onto a narrow mesh catwalk overlooking a vast, cavernous space. Kale peered down. It looked like a cargo bay, but one that had suffered catastrophic damage. Twisted metal girders hung like broken ribs, overgrown with thick, phosphorescent vines that pulsed with their own faint light, casting eerie shadows. Pools of stagnant, oily water reflected the ghostly glow. It smelled like rust and swamp gas. "Well," Kale muttered, "this is atmospheric." He carefully lowered himself onto the catwalk, testing its stability. It groaned ominously but held. He reached back to help Lyra, but she flowed out of the duct beside him with effortless grace, landing silently on the mesh. In the dim, phosphorescent light, her scales seemed to drink in the strange illumination, shimmering with soft greens and blues. Her tendrils swayed gently, sampling the air, and the soft chiming started again, inquisitive now. She pointed down towards the far end of the cargo bay. "Ship," she said. Cale followed her gesture. Partially hidden behind a collapsed section of bulkhead and draped in vines was the unmistakable outline of a small, sleek spacecraft. Not his rust bucket, hers, or what was left of it. It looked battered, scorched, one wing crumpled. "Yours," she nodded, her expression unreadable in the dim light. The chiming intensified, tinged with something melancholic. "Broken." "Yeah, I can see that," Cale replied, scanning the area. "No sign of the hunters yet, but they wouldn't be far behind. Can we fix it?" Lyra tilted her head, considering. "Maybe, needy parts." She looked towards the upper levels of the cargo bay, where sparks occasionally showered down from damaged conduits. Power. She then looked pointedly at Cale, tapping her own chest, then his. "We fix." Teamwork, great. Except fixing an alien ship was probably slightly outside his skill set, which mostly involved bypassing security locks and hot-wiring standard freighter engines. "Look, Lyra, my ship, the rust bucket, is probably our best bet. It's functional, we can get out of here." She shook her head, the movement sharp. The melancholy vanished, replaced by determination. The glow from her tendrils brightened. "No, this ship, Kytha." The word sounded important, resonant. "Mine, safe." She gestured emphatically towards the wrecked vessel. "We fix." Cale sighed. Arguing seemed pointless, and her ship was closer. Plus, sticking together seemed like the smartest, if most complicated, option right now. All right, we try it your way, but if those hunters show up, we bail for the rust bucket, deal?" Lyra considered this, her dark eyes searching his face. Then she gave a curt nod. "Deal." She stepped closer, close enough for him to feel the warmth radiating from her skin, close enough to smell that strange, enticing floralozone scent again. She reached out, not towards the ship but towards him. Her glowing fingertip hovered inches from his chest, right over his heart, just like in the galley. He didn't flinch this time. Her gaze held his, intense and searching. The resonant hum vibrated between them. Then she lightly tapped his chest. "Cale," she murmured, a soft affirmation. She held his gaze for another long moment, a silent question hanging in the air, before turning towards her broken ship. "Come," she said, already moving fluidly along the precarious catwalk. Cale watched her go, the spot on his chest tingling where she'd touched him. He had a feeling fixing the ship was going to involve a lot more than just rerouting power conduits. Getting down to the cargo bay floor involved navigating a treacherous lattice of buckled platforms and dangling cables. Lyra moved like a dancer, anticipating shifts in the ruined structure, her balance uncanny. Cale, relying more on brute force and muttered curses, felt clumsy and loud by comparison. Several times her cool hand shot out to steady him, her grip surprisingly strong, her touch sending those distracting sparks through his nerves. She didn't comment on his lack of grace, just offered the support and moved on, her focus absolute. Her wrecked ship was nestled in a cradle of twisted metal and bioluminescent flora. Up close, the damage was severe. Hull breaches gaped open like wounds, scorch marks marred the sleek, almost organic lines of the fuselage, and the cockpit canopy was shattered. Yet beneath the damage, the ship possessed a strange beauty, its design unlike any human or known alien tech Cale had ever encountered. It looked less manufactured and more grown. Lyra ran a hand reverently over a patch of undamaged hull, her scales shimmering in response. The ship seemed to hum faintly under her touch, a low thrum of recognition. "Kytha," she murmured again, her voice thick with emotion. "Okay, gorgeous wreck," Cale said, forcing practicality back into his voice. "Where do we start? Power core, nav systems." Lyra turned from the ship, her attention snapping back to him. She pointed towards a gaping panel near the ship's stern, wires spilling out like metallic entrails. "Power conduit, severed." She then indicated a flickering junction box high up on the cargo bay wall, sparks spitting intermittently. "Source." Connecting the two looked challenging. It would involve climbing, precarious balancing, and handling live, unstable power feeds. Fun. Right, Kale said, pulling a multi-tool from his belt. Standard disclaimer, I fry myself doing this, you inherit the rust bucket, keys are in my left boot. Lyra tilted her head, the corner of her mouth twitching. Was that humor? Kale, not fry, she stated with surprising confidence. Lyra, help. She gestured towards the junction box. I climb, bring cable. Then she pointed to the ship's damaged panel. You connect. He eyed the climb. It was high, exposed. You sure? Looks dicey. She gave him a look that clearly questioned his assessment of dicey compared to, say, fighting xenohunters. She flexed her fingers, the cyan glow intensifying slightly. Fast, she said simply. Before he could argue further, she sprang upwards, finding handholds and footholds on the ravaged wall with astonishing ease. She moved like water flowing uphill, her long limbs propelling her gracefully towards the sparking junction box. Kale watched, momentarily mesmerized by her agility. She wasn't just humanoid-shaped. Her species was clearly adapted for environments like this. Forced himself to focus on his own task, prying open the access panel on her ship further. The wiring inside was bizarre, crystalline conduits pulsed with faint light, woven around bioluminescent nodes. It looked more like a nervous system than an electrical grid. Lyra, he called up. Any particular wire I should be aiming for, or just jam it in and hope for the best? Her chiming laughter echoed down from above. Blue glow, she called back. Connect to blue glow. Simple enough. He hoped. He began clearing the damaged wires, preparing a space for the connection. Above, Lyra had reached the junction box. She braced herself, then reached into the spitting sparks with a bare hand. Kale winced, expecting her to be instantly electrocuted. Instead, the sparks seemed to flow around her fingers, drawn towards the cyan glow at her tips. She manipulated the damaged cables inside, her movements precise. A thick, insulated cable detached from the box and snaked down towards him, guided by her other hand. Ready, Kale. He grabbed the heavy cable just as a deafening crash echoed from the direction they'd come. Heavy footsteps pounded on the upper catwalks. The xenohunters. They found us, Kale yelled, shoving the cable end towards the ship's panel. Hurry! Lyra practically slid down the wall, landing silently beside him just as the first energy bolt sizzled past, impacting the hull near his head. Connect, she urged, shoving him towards the panel while simultaneously spinning to face their attackers. Kale jammed the cable end towards the glowing blue node inside the ship. Sparks flew. The ship groaned, lights flickering within the exposed wiring. Behind him, Lyra erupted, not with light this time, but with sound. A piercing, resonant shriek tore through the cargo bay, pulsing outwards in visible waves of sonic force. The catwalk above buckled. One of the hunters screamed, clutching his helmet, and stumbled back. The other fired wildly. Lyra dodged, a fluid shadow, then lunged. Kale risked a glance. She wasn't using weapons. She was using herself, claws he hadn't noticed before extended from her fingertips, rending the hunter's armored suit. It was brutal, primal, terrifyingly effective. He shoved the cable harder against the node. A surge of energy flowed, the blue glow intensifying, spreading through the ship's visible conduits. Lights flickered to life in the cockpit. A low hum emanated from the vessel, growing steadily stronger. It's working, Kale shouted. Lyra dispatched the second hunter with terrifying efficiency, then whirled back towards him, her eyes blazing, the primal energy still thrumming around her. She grabbed his arm, pulling him towards the now glowing entry ramp of her ship. Go, now. They scrambled aboard just as more energy fire impacted the hull behind them. The cockpit was small, intimate, designed for one pilot, maybe two if they were friendly, which Kale supposed they were rapidly becoming, albeit under duress. Lyra threw herself into the pilot's seat, a strange, semi-organic cradle that seemed to mold itself around her form. Her hands flew across controls that weren't buttons or screens, but glowing touch-sensitive pads and crystalline lattices. The ship hummed, vibrating with barely contained power. Outside, Kale could hear the remaining hunter shouting, probably calling for backup or deploying heavier weapons. Can this thing fly? Kale yelled over the rising whine of the engines. Lyra didn't answer in words. She slammed her hand onto a large, central crystal. The ship surged upwards, tearing free from the grasping vines and twisted metal with a screech of protest. They rocketed towards the gaping hole in the cargo bay ceiling, Kale pinned back in the oddly shaped co-pilot seat by the sheer acceleration. Below, the lone xenohunter fired desperately after them, energy bolts splashing harmlessly against the stern as they burst out into the bruised twilight of the derelict freighter's orbital space. Lyra banked sharply, dodging floating debris, her movements economical and precise. She was the ship was her. The connection was palpable. Kale finally caught his breath, adrenaline still hammering through him. He looked at Lyra. The primal battle glow had faded, but her scales still held a heightened iridescence, the patterns sharp and vivid. Her breathing was quick, shallow. She spared him a glance, her dark eyes intense. A single drop of iridescent blue blood trickled from a shallow cut on her cheekbone. Before he could think, Kale reached out, his thumb gently brushing the strange liquid away. Her skin was cool beneath his touch, smooth as polished glass. She froze, her eyes widening slightly. The low hum of the ship faltered for a split second. He pulled his hand back quickly, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. "Sorry, you were bleeding." She touched her cheek where he'd wiped the blood, her expression unreadable. The chiming started again, low and questioning. Then, unbelievably, she reached over, mimicking his gesture, her glowing fingertip tracing the line of his jaw. Her touch was feather-light, inquisitive, sending a jolt straight to his core. He swallowed hard, unable to look away from her intense gaze. The cockpit felt suddenly very small, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the escaping ship or the fatting adrenaline. It was the same energy he'd felt in the galley, the same current that flowed when she touched his wrist, but amplified, focused. The memory of her fighting, fierce and deadly, overlaid with this sudden, unexpected tenderness. It was profoundly confusing and dangerously attractive. She held his gaze for another long moment, her fingertip lingering on his skin before her attention snapped back to the controls. "Safe," she murmured, piloting the small ship away from the freighter's wreckage and towards the vast, star-dusted black. "For now." Kale leaned back in his seat, his jaw tingling where she'd touched him. Safe wasn't the word he'd use. Not with her beside him, radiating that strange mix of primal danger and intimate curiosity. Nothing about this felt safe, but it did feel inevitable. They flew in silence for a time, the only sounds the low thrum of Lyra's ship and the soft, almost subliminal chiming that seemed to emanate from her. Kale watched the starfield drift past the canopy, the pinprick lights cold and distant. He should be relieved. They'd escaped. They were alive. But the tension in the small cockpit was thick enough to chew. It coiled between them, a living thing born of shared danger, forced proximity, and those brief, charged touches. He kept replaying the moment he'd wiped the blood from her cheek, the startled intensity in her eyes, her mirrored gesture tracing his jaw. It felt more significant than just wiping away blood, like crossing some invisible line. He risked a glance at her. She seemed focused on piloting, her long fingers dancing over the glowing controls, but he noticed the subtle shifts in the iridescent patterns on her arms, the way her tendrils pulsed almost imperceptibly with soft light. She was aware of him. Hyper-aware, just like he was of her. The silence stretched, becoming awkward. He cleared his throat. "So, Kaitha," he tried, stumbling over the alien word, "means ship." Lyra turned her head slightly, a faint smile touching her lips. "More," she said. "Home, self, connection." She tapped the crystalline control panel. "She feels me, I feel her." She looked back at him, her dark eyes searching his. "Like touch." Ah, so the ship was basically an extension of her senses, linked through that strange resonance. Explains the intuitive piloting, and maybe explains why leaving it behind wasn't an option for her. And those hunter guys? Kale asked, shifting in the uncomfortable seat. "Why are they after you? What's so special about?" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at her glowing, iridescent form. Her smile faded. The light in her tendrils dimmed, the chiming faltering. "My people the Lyrene," she said, her voice low. "We shine, feel, connect." She hesitated, seeming to search for the right standard words. "Some want this, cage it, use it. Slavers wanting rare bioluminescence or unique energy signatures. Xenohunter Guild SOP." His gut clenched with a familiar cynicism, quickly followed by a less familiar surge of protectiveness towards the alien beside him. "So, where are your people now?" Lyra looked away, out at the stars, her profile etched against the void. The silence stretched heavy with unspoken grief. "Scattered," she whispered finally. "Hunted, hiding, my Kytha, my fault. I led them too close." Guilt. That explained the fierce determination to fix her ship, the melancholy he'd sensed. She wasn't just saving a vessel, she was trying to atone. "Hey," Kale said softly, leaning forward slightly. "You got away, you fought back, that's not nothing." She turned back to him, her expression vulnerable, the dominant confidence momentarily eclipsed. "They will hunt again, Kale, they follow the shine, the feeling." She looked down at her own hands, the faint cyan glow at her fingertips. "I endanger you," he snorted, trying to inject some levity. "Lady, my entire life is one big endangerment. Occupational hazard of picking through other people's space junk. Besides," he added, his voice softening slightly, "we're kind of a we now, aren't we? Hiding in ducts, fighting slavers, fixing alien ships sounds like bonding to me." A faint pulse of violet light flared across her scales. Her tendrils swayed, the chiming returning, tentative but warmer. She looked at him, a flicker of surprise, maybe hope in her dark eyes. "Bonding?" she echoed, testing the word. "Yes, close." "Yeah," Kale admitted, feeling his own cheeks warm slightly. "Something like that." He looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. "We need a plan, a place to lie low, repair properly. My ship, the Rust Bucket, has better cloaking tech, more space." Lyra considered this, her gaze flicking between him and the controls. "Your ship where?" Kale activated his wrist comp, projecting a small star chart into the space between them. "Nearest freeport is Xylos, but it's crawling with guild informants. There's a derelict relay station out in the Serpent Nebula, good cover but minimal resources." Or, he pointed to a small, uncharted system on the fringe. "There's this, found coordinates in an old smuggler's log, supposedly uninhabited. Risky, could be nothing there." Lyra studied the chart, her tendrils brushing against the holographic display. She pointed decisively towards the uncharted system. "There," she said. "Far, quiet." She looked at him, a challenge in her eyes. "We risk," he met her gaze, "going off-grid with a hunted alien he barely understood. It was insane, completely against every self-preservation instinct he had. But looking at her, at the faint hope warring with ingrained fear in her eyes, the choice felt surprisingly simple." "Yeah," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "We risk." Her answering smile was dazzling, transforming her face, chasing away the shadows. The chiming swelled, filling the cockpit with a bright, resonant harmony that vibrated right through him. It felt like agreement, like alignment, like the start of something terrifying and exhilarating. The small ship, the Kytha, slipped into the uncharted system like a ghost. Sensors showed a single, mid-sized planet, swirls of emerald green and sapphire blue beneath a thin veil of violet clouds. No energy signatures, no comm signals, no signs of civilization, current or ancient. Just quiet. As promised, Lyra guided the ship through the upper atmosphere, the organic curves of the vessel handling the turbulence with effortless grace. Kale watched the planet grow on the main viewer, a vibrant, living world teeming with potential and potential dangers. Still, it beat hiding in a nebula or dodging informants on Xylos. "Looks promising," he commented. "Any preference? Beachfront property, mountain view?" Lyra emitted a soft, amused chime. She banked the ship, heading towards a vast expanse of dense, emerald jungle bordering a network of deep blue rivers. "Water," she said. "Life." She found a small, natural clearing near one of the widest rivers, settling the Kytha down with barely a whisper. The moment the engines powered down, the sounds of the jungle rushed in, a cacophony of strange chirps, clicks, and rustling leaves. The air filtering into the cockpit was thick, humid, smelling of damp earth, unknown blossoms, and rich decay. It felt intensely alive. Lyra seemed to relax the moment they landed, the tension easing from her shoulders. She closed her eyes, her tendrils swaying gently as if tasting the air. A soft, contented hum replaced the questioning chime. She looked home, or at least closer to it than she'd been on the cold, dead freighter. Kale unstrapped himself, stretching stiff muscles. "Right, Priority 1, reconnaissance. Check for hostile fauna, potable water, anything useful. Priority 2, repairs. Both ships need work. He glanced at her. Priority 3, maybe figure out what we just got ourselves into. Lyra opened her eyes, the dark depths holding a new warmth. She uncurled herself from the pilot's cradle, moving towards the ramp. We explore, she agreed. The ramp lowered, revealing the breathtaking density of the jungle. Giant ferns towered over them, their fronds filtering the violet sunlight into dappled patterns on the clearing floor. Strange, brightly colored insects buzzed past, and the air vibrated with unseen life. Lyra stepped onto the damp earth, inhaling deeply, her scales shifting through shades of green and gold, almost camouflaging her against the foliage. She turned back to Kale, holding out her hand. An invitation. He hesitated for only a second. Taking her hand felt different now, out here, away from immediate danger. Less about survival, more about choice. Her skin was cool against his, the faint thrum of her energy a familiar, almost comforting sensation. He let her lead him out into the alien wilderness. They moved slowly at first, Kale scanning their surroundings with his multi-tool checking atmospheric composition, breathable, high oxygen, detecting energy sources, mostly biological, and mapping the immediate area. Lyra seemed to navigate by instinct, her senses far more attuned to this environment than his technology. She pointed out edible-looking fruits, which Kale insisted on scanning first, much to her chiming amusement, identified tracks of unseen creatures and occasionally paused, tilting her head as if listening to something beyond his range of hearing. The jungle was beautiful, overwhelming, and subtly menacing. Kale felt acutely aware of his human limitations, his duller senses, his vulnerability without his tech. Lyra, however, seemed to thrive. She moved with confidence, her earlier anxiety replaced by a vibrant curiosity. The way she interacted with the world was fascinating. She'd touch plants gently, her glow pulsing softly, as if communicating. She'd crouch low, watching strange, six-legged creatures skitter past, her focus absolute. They found a waterfall cascading down moss-covered rocks into a crystal-clear pool. Lyra released his hand and approached the water's edge, her reflection shimmering on the surface. She dipped her fingers in, the cyan glow spreading outwards in faint ripples. A look of pure bliss crossed her face. She glanced back at Kale, a playful light in her eyes. Before he could react, she scooped up a handful of water and flicked it at him. Cold droplets spattered his face and chest. He sputtered, surprised. "Hey." Lyra's chiming laughter echoed through the clearing, bright and infectious. He couldn't help but grin back. Okay, maybe this planet wasn't so bad. He retaliated, splashing water back at her. She shrieked, a surprisingly human sound mixed with her alien resonance, and dodged back, her movements impossibly quick. The playful fight escalated, dissolving the lingering tension between them into shared laughter and breathless splashing. In that moment, stripped of imminent danger, surrounded by the vibrant life of the alien jungle, she wasn't just a hunted exotic or a dangerous warrior. She was Lyra, curious, playful, intensely alive. And he was Kale, the guarded scavenger, finding himself unexpectedly charmed, willingly drawn into her orbit. The splashing slowed, leaving them breathless, water dripping from their clothes and hair, standing close in the shallow water. Her scales glistened, catching the dappled sunlight. Her eyes, dark and luminous, held his. The playful energy shifted, thickening into something else, something warmer, more intense. The air crackled with the familiar static charge. He could see the pulse of light in her tendrils quicken, mirroring the sudden acceleration of his own heartbeat. She reached out, her wet fingers tracing the curve of his collarbone, leaving a trail of cool water and tingling energy. "Kale," she whispered, her voice husky. He didn't pull away. He couldn't. He leaned in, drawn by an irresistible gravity, his gaze dropping to her lips. The chiming deepened into a low, resonant hum, vibrating through the water through him. This was it. The moment everything shifted. His mouth found hers. The initial contact was electric, a shockwave jolting through his system. Her lips were soft, cool, yet burned where they touched. The faint cyan glow he'd seen earlier pulsed gently against his skin. She made a soft sound deep in her throat, A surprised gasp mixed with a low hum of pleasure and pressed closer, her hand sliding up his chest to tangle in his wet hair. Her touch wasn't just physical, it was sensory overload. He felt the cool slickness of her scales against his soaked shirt, the radiating warmth of her body, the insistent thrumming resonance that seemed to bypass his skin and sink directly into his bones, vibrating in time with his own racing pulse. And beneath it all, that intoxicating scent of ozone and alien blossoms intensified, clouding his thoughts. He deepened the kiss, his hand finding the curve of her waist, pulling her flush against him. She molded herself to his body, surprisingly strong, her movements fluid and instinctive. Her tendrils brushed against his neck, sending shivers down his spine, the soft chiming turning into a richer, more complex harmony that resonated deep within his chest. It felt like she was singing to him, a silent, intimate melody conveyed through touch and vibration. This wasn't like kissing a human woman. It was stranger, more profound, laced with an undercurrent of alienness that was both thrilling and slightly terrifying. He could feel the intricate patterns shifting on her skin beneath his fingertips, could almost taste the faint energy that clung to her lips. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. He broke the kiss, gasping for air, resting his forehead against hers. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and dilated, shimmering with reflected jungle light and her own inner luminescence. The colors swirling on her scales were vibrant, chaotic deep violets, electric blues, flashes of fiery gold. Emotion made manifest. "Lyra," he breathed, the name feeling heavy, significant on his tongue. She didn't speak, just watched him, her expression a mixture of raw need and hesitant vulnerability. Her hand came up, fingers tracing his lips, then his jawline, the touch both possessive and incredibly gentle. The cyan glow at her fingertips left faint, tingling trails on his skin. She leaned in again, her kiss more demanding this time, less hesitant. Her slightly pointed teeth grazed his lower lip, not painfully, but with a hint of primal hunger that sent a fresh wave of heat through him. He groaned, pulling her closer, his hands exploring the sleek contours of her back, the surprisingly sharp edge of a dorsal fin hidden beneath her tunic. She responded with equal fervor, her body arching against his, her resonant hum intensifying until the water around them seemed to vibrate. This wasn't just physical attraction. It felt deeper, more elemental. A connection forged in shared danger, amplified by her alien nature, blossoming into something urgent and undeniable here, in the heart of this wild, alien world. The sounds of the jungle faded into a distant roar, secondary to the roaring in his own ears, the pounding of his heart, the overwhelming presence of her. He fumbled with the fastenings of her tunic, needing to feel her skin against his, needing to bridge the gap between their species, their experiences. She helped him, her cool fingers surprisingly deft, pulling his own soaked shirt over his head with an impatient tug. Skin met skin. The contact was searing. Her scales were impossibly smooth in some places, textured like fine jewels in others, cool to the touch yet radiating an internal heat. The intricate patterns pulsed with light against his bare chest, shifting, swirling, responding to his touch, to her own surging emotions. He felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the sheer sensory input. She tilted her head back, exposing the long, elegant line of her throat, the tendrils there pulsing with a bright, insistent rhythm. He pressed his lips to the base of her throat, tasting salt, water, and that unique energy signature that was purely her. A sharp, resonant cry escaped her lips, echoing through the clearing, a sound of pure, unadulterated pleasure that made his own body clench in response. He lifted her easily. She was lighter than she looked and carried her out of the pool, towards a patch of soft moss beneath the giant ferns. The boundary had been crossed. There was no going back now. He laid her down gently on the bed of vibrant green moss. The filtered violet sunlight dappled her iridescent skin, making the shifting patterns glow with an ethereal light. Her eyes, wide and dark, tracked his every movement, filled with a potent blend of desire, curiosity, and something deeper, more ancient, the primal imperative of connection, of mating. He knelt beside her, his own body trembling with a mixture of raw need and a strange sort of reverence. She was magnificent. alien, powerful, beautiful in a way he hadn't known existed. His gaze traveled over her form, the long limbs, the subtle curve of her hips, the delicate structure of her collarbones where the glowing tendrils originated, the faint, rhythmic pulse of light beneath her scales. He reached out, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, tracing the intricate lines that swirled across her abdomen. The patterns flared brighter under his touch, shifting from cool blues to warmer golds and reds. She gasped softly, arching into his touch, her resonant hum deepening into a guttural vibration of pleasure. "Kale," she whispered, her voice thick, husky. She reached for him, her cool fingers exploring the muscles of his chest, his shoulders, learning his human shape with the same intensity she'd studied the jungle. Her touch was electric, mapping his nerve endings, leaving trails of fire in its wake. When her glowing fingertips brushed against a faded scar on his ribs, a memento from a negotiation gone sour on Cygnus X1, the light flared, and he felt a sudden, sharp echo of old pain, followed by a wave of warmth, of soothing. It wasn't just touch. It was communication, empathy flowing directly from her into him. He shuddered, overwhelmed. This intimacy was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It stripped away his defenses, layer by layer, leaving him raw and exposed. He met her eyes, seeing his own turbulent emotions reflected in their dark depths. He lowered his head, kissing her again, fiercely this time, pouring all his confusion, his fear, his unexpected tenderness, and his overwhelming desire into the act. She responded instantly, meeting his intensity, her alien physiology adapting to his in ways that were both startling and deeply erotic. Her tongue, slightly forked at the tip, explored his mouth with electrifying curiosity. Their exploration became mutual, urgent. He helped her shed the rest of her damp tunic, revealing the full splendor of her form. Her anatomy was humanoid in basic structure, yet subtly different in ways that fascinated him. The smooth expanse of her stomach, the gentle flare of her hips, the juncture of her thighs where the scales faded into softer, faintly glowing skin. She trembled under his gaze, under his touch, but her eyes held a steady heat, an invitation. She urged him closer, her hands pulling at the waistband of his trousers, her intentions clear. Their joining was a revelation. Intense, overwhelming, a collision of worlds and senses. Her body welcomed him with a slick heat that belied the coolness of her skin. The resonance emanating from her intensified, enveloping them both, shaking him to the core. It felt less like simple friction and more like merging. Like their energies were intertwining, syncing, bonding on a level far deeper than just the physical. He felt her pleasure as keenly as his own, communicated through touch, through the shifting lights on her skin, through the resonant song vibrating between them. Her sounds were alien and beautiful, gasps that turned into harmonic chimes, cries that resonated with the thrumming energy. He moved within her, lost in the sensations, in her reactions, in the sheer alien wonder of it all. She arched beneath him, her claws retracted now, thankfully digging lightly into his back, not in pain, but in pure, uninhibited ecstasy. The patterns on her skin exploded into a kaleidoscope of brilliant, dazzling color, pulsing in time with their frantic rhythm. The energy built between them, coiling tighter and tighter, until it felt like the air itself crackled. Her resonant song reached a fever pitch, a complex harmony that vibrated through every cell of his being. His own release tore through him, hot and blinding, coupled with a profound sense of connection, of belonging that stole his breath away. He collapsed against her, spent, his heart hammering against hers, listening to her chiming gasps soften into contented hums. The light from her scales slowly subsided, leaving them bathed in the soft, violet twilight filtering through the leaves, wrapped in a cocoon of shared heat and resonant silence. They lay tangled together on the moss for a long time, the sounds of the jungle slowly filtering back into Kale's awareness. Lyra's head rested on his chest, her tendrils occasionally brushing his skin with feather-light touches. The rhythmic, gentle hum emanating from her was deeply soothing, a stark contrast to the wild energy of moments before. He stroked her back, feeling the intricate texture of her scales, still marveling at the reality of her, of them. What had just happened? It was more than sex. It felt binding, Like that resonance, that shared energy had forged something new between them. He felt strangely peaceful, his usual guardedness temporarily muted by exhaustion and an overwhelming sense of connection. Lyra stirred, lifting her head to look at him. Her eyes were soft, the fierce intensity replaced by a quiet vulnerability. The colors on her skin were muted now, gentle swirls of lavender and silver. She reached up, tracing the line of his scar again, her glowing fingertip leaving a faint warmth. "Hurts," she murmured. Cale shook his head. "Old news." He hesitated, then asked, "What was that earlier? When you touched it, I felt—" She tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "Feel you," she explained simply. "Feel, echo, try to soothe. Empathy through touch. Literal, physical empathy." Another layer of her alien nature revealed, another reason the guild hunted her people. He could only imagine the applications: healing, interrogation, control. No wonder they were valuable and vulnerable. "Your people," Cale said quietly. "The Lyrene, are there many left?" The light in her tendrils flickered, dimmed. "Few," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Scattered, hiding, we fade without connection." She looked at him, her gaze suddenly intense. "Need bond, resonance, share self." Oh, this wasn't just attraction, not just finding solace in each other after trauma. For her, this connection, this intimacy, it was survival, a biological imperative. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Had he understood what he was doing? Had she? Or was it instinct driving them both? He felt a confusing mix of awe, fear, and a strange sense of responsibility. Lyra seemed to sense his turmoil. She pulled back slightly, searching his face. "Cale," she asked, a worried chime entering her resonance. He forced a reassuring smile, reaching out to cup her cheek. Her skin was cool, but the energy beneath it felt warm, alive. "It's okay, Lyra, just—" "A lot to take in." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This connection, it's important to you, to your survival." She nodded slowly, her dark eyes wide. "And to Cale?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Was it important to him? Beyond the physical release, beyond the temporary solace, he looked at her, truly looked at her, the alien angles of her face, the shifting light on her skin, the deep vulnerability in her eyes. He thought of her fierce defense against the hunters, her determination to save her ship, her playful splashing in the water, the overwhelming intimacy they just shared. Yes, God's help him, yes, it was important. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah, Lyra, it is." A slow, radiant smile spread across her face, chasing away the shadows. The colors on her skin brightened, swirling into patterns of warm gold and soft rose. The resonant hum intensified, washing over him in waves of what felt undeniably like relief, joy, affection. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against his, her tendrils gently curling around his neck. It wasn't sexual this time. It was pure connection, a silent affirmation of the bond they'd forged. They stayed like that for a long moment, simply breathing together, feeling the resonance flow between them, a quiet promise in the heart of the alien jungle. Eventually, practicality intruded. The violet sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. The jungle sounds were shifting, changing, hinting at nocturnal predators. "We should head back," Cale said softly, reluctant to break the spell. Lyra nodded, pulling away slowly. They helped each other dress, the simple actions now imbued with a new intimacy, a comfortable familiarity. As Cale pulled on his boots, he noticed Lyra examining the Kaitha key he kept tucked inside one. She looked up at him, holding it delicately between her glowing fingers. "You're home?" she asked. He grinned. "Sort of, my ship, the rust bucket, ugly as sin, but she gets me around." Lyra turned the key over in her hand, then held it out to him. But before he could take it, she paused, then pressed it gently against the center of her own chest for a brief moment, right over her heart, her glow flaring softly. Then she placed it firmly back in his hand. A gesture, a claim, an acceptance. With her it was hard to tell, but it felt significant. Hand in hand, they walked back towards the clearing where their ships waited, bathed in the deepening twilight. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous. The guild wouldn't give up easily. But Cale no longer felt quite so alone. He had Lyra, and she apparently had him. It was a terrifying, exhilarating thought. They spent the next cycle working, falling into an easy rhythm. Kale focused on the rust bucket, running diagnostics, reinforcing the aging shield emitters, and patching the hull breach sustained during their escape from the freighter. Lyra, using salvaged parts from the derelict and tools Kale didn't recognize from her own ship, worked with quiet intensity on the Kytha. Her connection to the vessel was obvious. She seemed to coax it back to health, her touch eliciting responsive hums and glows from the crystalline conduits. They communicated easily now, a blend of Kale's standard, Lyra's growing vocabulary, and the nuanced language of touch and resonance that Kale was slowly learning to interpret. A brush of her hand conveyed reassurance, a specific pulse of light warned of unstable energy, a low hum signaled contentment. It was intimate, efficient, and felt strangely natural. In the evenings, they explored the jungle near the clearing, Lyra showing him plants that glowed with captured sunlight, fruits that tasted like sparks on the tongue, hidden pools where iridescent fish schooled. She moved through the wilderness with a grace that still astonished him, completely at home. Kale, in turn, shared stories of his travels, the neon canyons of Cygnus X1, the crystalline markets of Hadar Prime, the quiet desolation of abandoned asteroid mines. He found himself opening up in ways he never had before, the words flowing easily in her quiet, attentive presence. Their physical intimacy continued, evolving beyond the initial desperate urgency. It became slower, more exploratory, a mutual discovery of sensation and connection. Kale learned the sensitive ridges along her spine, the way certain resonances made the colors on her skin bloom, the soft spot behind the crest on her head where a gentle touch made her melt. Lyra learned his human responses, the places he was ticklish, the way his breath hitched when her glowing fingers traced patterns on his skin, the sounds he made when pleasure overwhelmed him. It was playful, tender, and fiercely passionate, deepening the bond between them with every touch, every shared look, every resonant sigh. One evening, while watching twin moons rise over the jungle canopy from the rust bucket's cockpit, Lyra grew quiet. She traced patterns on the transparisteel viewport, her glow subdued. Kale, she began hesitantly, the guild they tracked the Kytha, its signature, unique. Kale nodded, sobering instantly. He'd known this lull wouldn't last. We can dampen it further, reroute power through the rust bucket systems when we're grounded, mask the output. Lyra shook her head, her tendrils drooping slightly. Masking helps, but not enough, not forever. They have sensors for Lyrene resonance. She looked at him, her eyes dark with worry. They will find us. He reached out, taking her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Her skin felt cool, her energy muted. Then we fight them, he said firmly, together. She squeezed his hand, a flicker of her usual fire returning. They are many, we are two. We're resourceful, Kale countered. And we have 2 ships, we have this. He tapped his temple. And you have, well, he gestured towards her. Sonic blasts, camouflage, climbing like a gecko, whatever other alien superpowers you're hiding. A small chime of amusement escaped her. Not superpowers, just Lyrene. Point is, Kale continued, we won't make it easy for them, and we have this planet, home turf advantage. He looked out at the darkening jungle. We can prepare, set traps, use the environment. Lyra considered this, her gaze sharpening. The strategic mind he'd glimpsed during their escape reemerged. Traps, she echoed, tasting the word. Yes, use the jungle, use resonance. She looked at him, an idea sparking in her eyes. We can create false signals, echoes, confuse their sensors, Kale grinned. Now you're talking. A resonance feedback loop, maybe, overload their scanners. They spent the next few hours planning, sketching designs on Kale's datapad, combining his technical knowledge with her innate understanding of resonance and the local environment. They'd use natural energy sources, amplifier crystals Lyra salvaged from her ship, and Kale's jury-rigged tech to create a defensive network around the clearing. It was a long shot, but it was their shot. As they worked, Kale felt a shift in their dynamic. They weren't just lovers hiding out. They were partners preparing to defend their newfound sanctuary, their connection solidifying into a fierce, protective alliance. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was overlaid with determination. He looked at Lyra, bent over the schematics, her face illuminated by the glow of the datapad and her own soft luminescence, and felt a surge of fierce affection. He wouldn't let them take her, whatever it took. First warning wasn't technological. It was Lyra. She bolted upright from a light sleep beside Cale in his narrow bunk on the rust bucket, her body rigid, her tendrils flared and glowing a harsh, warning crimson. "They come," she hissed, the sound vibrating with primal alert. Cale was instantly awake, grabbing his pulse pistol. Scanners on the rust bucket flickered to life, confirming her senses, multiple energy signatures dropping through the atmosphere, converging on their location. Guild drop ships. Fast movers, they hadn't wasted any time. "How many?" Cale asked, already pulling on his boots. 6 ships, Lyra replied, her eyes scanning the tactical display Cale projected onto the bulkhead. "Maybe 30 hunters, 30 against 2, the odds were appalling." "Our network," Lyra nodded, already moving towards the ramp controls. The crimson light from her tendrils pulsed rhythmically. "Ready, activated." She paused at the ramp, turning back to him, her face grim but resolute. "They expect one," Lyra, hiding, weak. A fierce, predatory smile touched her lips. "They do not expect us." They didn't wait for the hunters to land. As the drop ships descended towards the clearing, Lyra initiated the first phase of their plan. Channeling her resonance through the amplifier crystals they'd hidden in the dense foliage, she sent out a disorienting pulse of energy. On Cale's scanner display, several of the descending energy signatures wavered, their descent becoming erratic. Alarms blared faintly over the external mics. "Confusion pulse working," Cale reported, toggling the rust bucket's external defenses online. "Buying us time." Lyra nodded, her focus intense. She manipulated the resonance field, creating phantom energy signals, ghost images of the Kytha appearing and disappearing among the trees, drawing the hunters' fire away from their actual position. Cale used the distraction to bring the rust bucket's dorsal cannons online, targeting the nearest, most stable dropship. Laser fire stitched across the sky, impacting the vessel's shields. It wobbled, returning fire wildly. Energy bolts slammed into the rust bucket's reinforced shields, making the deck plates shudder. "They're zeroing in," Cale yelled. Lyra didn't flinch. She closed her eyes, concentrating, her entire body humming with focused energy. The jungle itself seemed to respond. Vines snaked out, obscuring lines of sight. Phosphorescent spores erupted from bursting pods, creating clouds of shimmering chaff that further confused sensors. Hidden geysers of pressurized gas erupted, sending smaller scout drones tumbling. It was chaos, orchestrated chaos, using the planet as a weapon. One dropship, damaged by Cale's fire and Lyra's environmental traps, crashed into the jungle canopy with a satisfying explosion. Another veered sharply, trying to avoid a sudden sonic burst Lyra directed at it, and clipped a massive tree, spinning out of control. 4 remained, landing heavily around the perimeter of the clearing, disgorging heavily armed xenohunters. They advanced cautiously, using scanners, firing probing shots into the foliage. "Phase 2, Lyra murmured, her eyes snapping open. She sprinted out of the rust bucket, disappearing into the dense undergrowth near where the Kytha sat silently. Cale gritted his teeth, trusting her, and focused on providing covering fire, forcing the hunters to keep their heads down. He saw Lyra reappear near her ship, touching the hull. The Kytha shimmered, its outline blurring, fading, until it seemed to melt into the surrounding jungle, active camouflage, far more advanced than anything Cale possessed. Then Lyra herself vanished into the greenery. The hunters advanced, splitting into teams, sweeping the clearing. Cale picked off targets of opportunity, but they were too many, too well equipped. They were closing in on the rust bucket. Suddenly, one of the hunting teams cried out. A wave of pure sonic force slammed into them, sending them reeling, clutching their helmets. Lyra, a fleeting blur of iridescent motion, darted out from the trees, disabling 2 hunters with swift, precise strikes before melting back into the shadows. She was using hit-and-run tactics, her speed and camouflage making her an almost impossible target. Cale used the momentary chaos to reposition the rust bucket slightly, giving him better firing angles. He saw another team approaching Lyra's last known position, deploying a containment field generator. He fired, disrupting their advance, but took a heavy energy hit to his port shield emitter in return. Sparks showered the cockpit. Lyra, containment field sector Gamma. Her response was immediate. The ground beneath the hunters erupted as pressurized steam vents, triggered by her resonance, scalded and disoriented them. But one hunter got a clear shot. Kale watched in horror as a sedation dart struck Lyra's shoulder. She cried out, stumbling, the iridescent colors on her skin flickering erratically. The hunters surged forward. Rage, cold, and absolute flooded Kale. He slammed his fist down on the weapon's console, overriding safety protocols, pouring all available power into the main cannons. A sustained beam of energy lanced out, cutting down 2 hunters instantly, forcing the others back. He lowered the rust bucket's ramp. "Lyra, get back!" She staggered towards the ship, pulling the dart from her shoulder, her movements becoming sluggish. Kale laid down, suppressing fire, keeping the remaining hunters pinned. She reached the ramp, collapsing onto the deck plating just as he sealed the door and lifted the ship a few meters off the ground, shields flaring under renewed attack. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes hazy, the glow from her tendrils fatting rapidly. "Kale," she whispered before her eyes rolled back and she slumped unconscious. The remaining hunters regrouped, pouring fire onto the hovering rust bucket. Shields were failing, they were trapped, but Lyra was safe, for now. Kale frantically diverted power, trying to reinforce the failing shields while simultaneously laying down suppressing fire. The rust bucket groaned under the barrage, warning lights flashing across the console. He glanced back at Lyra. She lay unnervingly still on the deck, the vibrant colors of her scales dulled, the gentle hum of her resonance silenced. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through his adrenaline-fueled rage. The sedation dart, what was it doing to her? Was it just sleep, or something worse for her alien physiology? He had to get them out of here. Now. He risked everything, dropping the shields for a fraction of a second to channel maximum power to the engines and main cannon. He fired one last desperate, sweeping blast at the hunters below, scattering them, then slammed the throttle forward. The rust bucket screamed in protest, engines whining at overload, and shot upwards, punching through the canopy and clawing for altitude. Warning klaxons shrieked, shield failure imminent, hull breaches detected, engines overheating. He ignored them, pushing the ship harder, faster, desperate to put distance between them and the planet, between Lyra and the Guild. Only when they reached the relative safety of low orbit, hidden amongst the thin asteroid belt ringing the system, did Kale dare to ease back on the throttle. The ship shuddered violently, threatening to shake itself apart. He quickly ran damage control, stabilizing the engines, rerouting power to essential systems. They were alive but battered. Badly. He killed the main drive, letting the rust bucket drift silently amongst the asteroids, relying on passive sensors and the debris field for cover. Then he scrambled back to Lyra. He knelt beside her, his heart pounding. Her breathing was shallow, her skin cool to the touch, the vibrant iridescence almost entirely gone, leaving her scales a dull, muted gray. The spot where the dart had struck her shoulder looked inflamed, angry. He gently touched her cheek. "Lyra, hey, wake up." No response. Panic tightened its icy grip. He activated the ship's medical scanner, running it over her. Her vital signs were dangerously low, her unique energy signature flickering like a dying candle. The sedative wasn't just knocking her out. It was actively suppressing the resonance that was fundamental to her life. It was killing her. "No," Kale breathed, raw fear clawing at his throat. "No, you don't get to die on me now, Shiny." He racked his brain. How did her people connect, share resonance, through touch, through the Kytha, through bonding? He looked at his own hands, then back at Lyra. Could he somehow share his own energy, jumpstart her system? It sounded insane, like something out of a bad holodrama, but what choice did he have? He gently gathered her into his arms, cradling her against his chest, trying to share his body heat. He pressed his forehead against hers, concentrating, trying to recall the feeling of her resonance flowing into him during their moments of intimacy. He focused on the connection they'd forged, the warmth, the affection, the fierce protectiveness he felt for her. He poured all of it outwards, projecting his own energy, his own life force, towards her, hoping it could bridge the gap, reignite her spark. "Come on, Lyra," he whispered, his voice thick with desperation. "Feel me, connect, don't leave me." He felt nothing at first, just the chilling stillness of her body, the terrifying silence where her vibrant hum should have been. Doubt gnawed at him. This was crazy. He was just a human scavenger. What could he possibly offer her alien system? But he didn't stop. He held her tighter, focusing harder, pouring every ounce of his will, his emotion into the silent plea. Stay, connect, live. Then a flicker, so faint he almost missed it, a tiny pulse of warmth against his skin. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration against his chest. He held his breath, concentrating fiercely. Another flicker, slightly stronger this time. A soft, hesitant chime echoed faintly in the quiet cockpit. Slowly, tentatively, like the first rays of dawn, a pale cyan light began to glow at the tips of her tendrils where they rested against his neck. Color began to seep back into her scales, faint swirls of blue and lavender chasing away the gray. Her breathing deepened slightly. Her eyelids fluttered. Cale felt tears prick his eyes, blurring his vision. Relief washed over him, so potent it left him weak. He kept holding her, kept projecting warmth, connection, until her resonance steadied, strengthening into a soft, continuous hum, and the colors on her skin glowed with a gentle, healthy light. Lyra's eyes slowly opened. They focused on his face, hazy at first, then clearing, a look of profound exhaustion mixed with confusion, then recognition. "Cale," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "You warm." He let out a shaky laugh, relief making him giddy. "Yeah, well, human speciality, built-in heaters." He eased her back gently, scanning her again with the med scanner. Her vitals were climbing, stabilizing. The sedative's effects were receding, counteracted by whatever he'd just done. She reached up, her glowing fingers tracing his jawline just as she had by the waterfall. The touch was weak, but the connection, the resonance flowing between them was undeniable, stronger even than before. "You saved me," she murmured, wonder in her voice. He shook his head, stroking her cheek. "We saved each other, Lyra." He looked into her dark, luminous eyes, seeing not just an alien, not just a survivor, but his partner, his bondmate, his Lyra. Always. A soft, radiant smile touched her lips. The resonant hum deepened, filled with an emotion that needed no translation. Love, gratitude, belonging. In the battered cockpit of the drifting rust bucket, surrounded by the silent dance of asteroids, they held each other, two survivors from different worlds, bound together by danger, by desire, and by a connection that defied species and stars. The guild was still out there. The future was uncertain. But as Cale held Lyra, feeling her life, her resonance, pulse steadily against him, he knew one thing for sure. Wherever they went next, they would face it together. Their journey had just begun.